This broadcast is brought to you by the British Israel Church of God.
Hi, this is Peter Salemi. There has been much speculation about who is the King of the North that you read of in Daniel, the 11th chapter, verses 40 through 45. Many in the Protestant world, and even those in the Seventh-day Churches of God, believe that the King of the North is the beast power that you read of in the 13th and 17th chapters of the book of Revelation. Is that the King of the North? Or has the King of the North been here since after World War II and has already fulfilled the prophecies of Daniel, the 11th chapter, verses 40 through 44? Stay tuned.
The Watchman program. Evangelist and commentator Peter Salemi, bringing you the truth about today's world news in the light of Bible prophecy.
So who is the King of the North that you read of in Daniel, the 11th chapter, verses 40 through 45? As I mentioned in the introduction, many in the Protestant world and even the Seventh-day Churches of God believe that the coming beast power is the King of the North that you read of in Daniel, the 11th chapter. But there's something wrong with that interpretation. We read in Daniel, the 11th chapter, verse 45, it says that this King of the North, it says, he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. Now it says he comes to his end, and Daniel, the 11th chapter, the 12th chapter rather, verse 1 says, and at that time, this is just a continuation of chapter 11, at that time, what time? Well, the time when the King of the North comes to his end. It says, there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. That is the Great Tribulation. It says, if this is the beast power, it says the beast comes to his end before the tribulation. But when we go to Revelation, the 17th chapter, verses 12 through 14, it plainly says this. It says, the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, and which have received no kingdom as of yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. It says they have one mind, and they shall give their power and strength to the beast. And then it says that these shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And they that are with him are called, chosen, and faithful. The beast plainly comes to his end at the second coming of Jesus Christ, after the tribulation, during the day of the Lord. And that's when Christ comes back, after the tribulation, during the day of the Lord. You can read that in Matthew, the 24th chapter, verses 29 through 31. And you read in Revelation, the 19th chapter, you see the beast being put to death, being thrown into the lake of fire. In verse 20, the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, with which he deceived them that have received the mark of the beast, and them that worship his image. These both were cast alive into the lake of fire, burning with brimstone. So the beast comes to his end at the second coming of Jesus Christ. If this King of the North is the beast power, well, it says this King of the North comes to his end before the tribulation. Is that a contradiction? Does the Bible contradict in any one of its points? Well, there is no contradiction. The only problem is man's interpretation of what the Scriptures say. There is no contradiction when you understand who really is the King of the North. And when we put together Daniel 11 with Daniel 2, they fit together like hand and glove, we can understand who is the King of the North of Daniel, the 11th chapter, verse 40 through 45. And when the beast power actually comes and fights Christ at his coming. Now, before I get on with some of these prophecies, I want to offer you this free booklet that you can download absolutely free of charge off our website, britishisrael.ca. That's british-israel.ca. And of course, you can see the web address on your screen. Now, we don't have the budget as of yet to offer you a free hard copy of this booklet. It's just for download only. And God willing, in time, if people decide to start tithing to our organization and we actually have the budget to print many of these booklets and give them out free of charge, we will. But until that time, God willing, we are just offering this booklet as a free download. And then you can take this booklet, print it out on your own computer and have a hard copy that way. But it's a free download off our website, britishisrael.ca. Now, for more information about us and our ministry, Bill Petzinas will give you the information you need to contact us and to get other information about the British Israel Church of God. Take a look at this, and I'll be right back.
To download your free literature, log onto our website at www.britishisrael.ca. If you want to write, call, or text for more information, our address is the British Israel Church of God, P.O. Box 30043, Brooklyn Town Center, Whitby, Ontario, Canada. Postal code is L1MOB5. Our USA address is 171 West Barbara Avenue, Pahrump, Nevada, USA. Postal code 89060. If you want to reach us by telephone, call or text at 905-447-4415 or 416-898-7407.
Daniel 11 is the longest prophecy in the Bible. It starts with the king of Babylon, and then it goes through many of the successive world-ruling empires that were to rule this world right up till our day today, and eventually to the second coming of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. It starts off in Babylon, and then it goes into Persia, and then in Greece, and then during the Roman Empire. It even speaks of the apostles and Jesus Christ of Nazareth, and then it works its way into the medieval times and the Holy Roman Empire. And from there, it stops in verse 39 of the Holy Roman Empire, which stopped during the time of Hitler and Mussolini. Then in verse 40, it says, and at the time of the end. And that actually started in 1990, which I'll get onto a little later on in the broadcast. But it speaks of the time of the end, our day today. And then it talks about the Great Tribulation in Daniel, the 12th chapter, verse 1, and eventually on to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Now, in Daniel 2, we see that Nebuchadnezzar had a dream that troubled him. And he had all these interpreters come to interpret that dream, and none could get it right. But then, of course, Daniel came to him and interpreted the dream to Nebuchadnezzar. Now, Nebuchadnezzar saw this great image in the plain, and he saw a head of gold, arms and chest of silver, a torso of brass, and 2 legs of iron. Now, many commentaries, like the Jameson, Fawcett, and Brown commentary, other commentaries will prove to you that these are the 4 world-ruling empires that were to rule the world right down to our day today. The head of gold, of course, is Babylon. The chest and arms of silver are the Medo-Persians. The torso of brass is Greece. And the legs of iron is the Roman Empire. Now, when we get down to the feet and toes, this is where I believe the Protestant churches and the Seventh-day Churches of God have missed the clues into, when we get to the feet and toes, they have missed the vital key that unlocks this prophecy. And when you understand this vital key, you can understand what's going on in Daniel, the 11th chapter, verses 40 through 45, and who actually fights Christ at his coming. Notice what it says here in Daniel, the 2nd chapter, and starting in verse 40. And the 4th kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces and subdue all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. Many commentaries will tell you that this is obviously the Roman Empire. Then it says this, whereas thou sawest the feet and toes part potter's clay, and part iron, the kingdom shall be divided. So we get down to the feet and toes, and we see potter's clay. But then it goes on to say, but there shall be in it of the strength of iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. Here is a different type of clay. Potter's clay you can mold and shape. You see a lot of potters mold and shape this clay, and they build bowls and jars and so on. But miry clay is a different type of clay. It's non-adhesive. You can't mold it. You can't do anything with it. It's a different type of clay. And notice it says the iron is mixed with miry clay, whereas with the potter's clay, it says, whereas thou sawest the feet and toes part potter's clay and part iron, the kingdom shall be divided. So the potter's clay, the kingdom is divided. The miry clay, the kingdom is mixed. And then it says, as the toes of the feet were part iron and part clay, meaning the potter's clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. Verse 43, whereas thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. Now notice verse 44. In the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom. So this is the second coming of Jesus Christ. It says in the days of these kings, the 10 kings mixed with the miry clay are going to fight Christ at his coming, which takes place after the tribulation during the day of the Lord. So before that must come the potter's clay. And the potter's clay phase comes to his end before the tribulation, since the miry clay fights Christ after the tribulation. So what we read in Daniel, the 11th chapter, verses 40 through 45, is the potter's clay phase. And we explain that all in that booklet, Middle Eastern Prophecy, step by step, to show you how it all actually fits together. Now, it says the iron is with the potter's clay. What is the potter's clay? Now remember, we must let the Bible interpret itself. Now, does the Bible actually interpret what the potter's clay is? Well, we find it in Jeremiah, the 18th chapter, verse 6. Notice what God says here. O house of Israel, cannot I do with you as this potter, says the Eternal? Behold, as the clay is in the potter's hand, so are ye in my hand, O house of Israel. So there's the key. Who is the house of Israel? Now, when you look at Old Testament history, we find that the house of Israel and the house of Judah were split into two separate kingdoms. We had the northern kingdom of the house of Israel, and then we had the southern kingdom of the house of Judah. And the house of Judah are the modern day Jews today. So it's not dealing with the Jews, it's dealing with the northern 10 tribe house of Israel. What happened to the house of Israel? What happened to the so-called lost 10 tribes of Israel? There's been much speculation about it. I remember Grant Jeffrey, back when he was alive, many years ago, said the lost 10 tribes were the Jews, some Jews out in Afghanistan. Other people have speculated that it's the Jews in Africa. But again, they are not Jews. The house of Israel are not Jews. They never have been Jews and never will be Jews. The word Jew is just a nickname for Judah, one that comes from the tribe of Judah, a Judahite. That's what Jew means. It means the house of Judah, not the house of Israel. What happened to the house of Israel? Well, if you'd like to download our booklet, The United States and the British Commonwealth in Prophecy, you will find that the 10-tribe house of Israel got taken away into Assyria, that you read of in 2 Kings, the 17th chapter, 2 Kings, the 15th chapter. They got taken away in many successive waves of invasions, and they dwelt between the Black and the Caspian Sea. From there, when the Assyrian Empire fell, they migrated up through the Black and the Caspian Sea, and they migrated up into Europe. And we see the Angles, the Jutes, the Saxons. All these people are from the house of Israel, and they settled into Scandinavia and Britain. And then, of course, Britain colonized and became a great company of many nations. And Manasseh, of the tribe, one of the tribes of Joseph, called Manasseh, settled into the United States and became a great nation. And when you read in Genesis, the 49th chapter and the 48th chapter, we see that Ephraim and Manasseh, Ephraim was to become a great company, a commonwealth of many nations, and Manasseh was to emerge as a great single, powerful nation. And you read in Genesis, the 48th chapter, that Jacob crossed his hands to his two grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and he said, "Let my name," that is the name of Israel, "be named on them." And then he says, "Let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth." It was a global promise. And then you read in Genesis, the 49th chapter, the many promises and the many blessings that were to come upon Joseph, and he would be the chief of his brethren. And these promises and these prophecies have been fulfilled to the letter by our peoples called the United States and the British Commonwealth of Nations. We are Ephraim and Manasseh, the peoples of Canada, Britain, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, the rest of the British Commonwealth are Ephraim. The United States of America is Manasseh. We are the house of Israel. So the potter's clay is the house of Israel, modern day United States and the British Commonwealth of Nations. And it says here in Daniel 2 that we see the potter's clay with the iron. What is that? The kingdom is divided. It is partly strong and partly broken. That is a perfect fulfillment of NATO, the NATO alliance. And this is what it's speaking of in Daniel, the 2nd chapter. It is speaking of the NATO alliance that was formed after World War II. And who is the leader of NATO? Who is the founder of NATO? None other than the United States of America. And the King of the North is the President of the United States of America, and has fulfilled these prophecies in Daniel, the 11th chapter, verses 40 through 44. And we will show you that in the next segment. But first, we want you to get this free booklet, The Middle East in Prophecy. Download it off our website free of charge. And of course, God willing, we can put together a budget where we can actually hand out the copies of these booklets, hard copies of these booklets, free of charge when we get the budget to do so. But until that time, all our booklets are going to be downloaded absolutely free of charge off our website, britishisrael.ca. Take a look at this, and I'll be right back.
To download your free literature, log onto our website at www.britishisrael.ca. If you want to write, call, or text for more information, our address is the British Israel Church of God, P.O. Box 30043, Brooklyn Town Center, Whitby, Ontario, Canada. Postal code is L1MOB5. Our USA address is 171 West Barbara Avenue, Pahrump, Nevada, USA. Postal code 89060. If you want to reach us by telephone, call or text at 905-447-4415 or 416-898-7407.
When one realizes that down at the feet and toes there are two phases that takes place, the potter's clay phase and the miry clay phase, well then Daniel 11 makes total sense. And we can understand who fights Christ at his coming after the tribulation during the day of the Lord. Now, as we read back in Daniel, the 2nd chapter, it says that these 10 toes are mixed with the miry clay. And then it says, in the days of these kings, the 10 toes mixed with the miry clay, shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom. And this corresponds perfectly with Revelation, the 17th chapter, verses 12 through 14, as we read before, that is the beast power with the 10 kings giving their power and strength to the beast, and these 10 kings fight Christ at his coming. These 10 kings are mixed with miry clay. So that is the miry clay phase that takes place after the tribulation, during the day of the Lord. But in Daniel, the 11th chapter, verses 40 through 45, it says, the king of the north shall come to his end before the tribulation. When we understand the potter's clay and the miry clay phase, we can understand that this is the potter's clay phase. And the potter's clay is NATO. And of course, the king of the north is the president of the United States. And of course, this northern power is the European power, because it says here in Daniel, the 11th chapter, verse 44, it says, tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. If tidings out of the east and out of the north are troubling him, obviously this northern power is in the east, in the west, and in the north, which is obviously Europe. And Europe is in an alliance with the potter's clay. And since the potter's clay is the house of Israel, and the United States founded NATO, the king of the north, it's not the king in the north, it's the king of the north. It's an alliance with, the potter's clay makes an alliance with the European power, and he is the king of it. The founder of NATO is the king of this northern alliance. It's not the king in it, it's the king of it. So the president of the United States is the king of the north. Now it says here, when we get on to this prophecy, in Daniel the 11th chapter, verse 40, it says, and at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him. Now here we see the king of the north, NATO, going into the Middle East. Now when NATO was founded, it was purely for the protection of Western Europe against the Soviet Union. And it was literally founded to protect Europe. What is the one event that had NATO leave its founding purpose of protecting Europe and have it go into the Middle East and fight a war in the Middle East? What is that one event that took place where this southern power was pushing at the northern power of NATO and caused him to come into the Middle East and attack the Middle East? That took place in the Gulf War of 1990 and 91. That was the first time that NATO ever left its original purpose and go into the Middle East and fight Saddam Hussein, who is the king of the South. Not the king in the South, but the king of the South. The southern Gulf states had an alliance, and Saddam Hussein joined that alliance and became the dominant player in that alliance. And that alliance was funding him, and he pushed at the king of the north with an oil embargo. And what we read in Daniel, the 11th chapter, verses 40 through 43, is the Gulf War that took place in 1990 and 91. It says here, at the time of the end shall the king of the south, that's Saddam Hussein, push at him, that's the king of the north. And he did that with an oil embargo. Remember when he attacked Kuwait and he threatened the economies of the West with the oil embargoes? And so the king of the north at that time was, of course, George Bush Sr. When he got jostled, when he got pushed by Saddam Hussein, it says here, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind. Do we remember the Gulf War where the United States came at Saddam Hussein, many said, like a storm because of American air power that came against Saddam Hussein like a storm. And many have called the Gulf War the Whirlwind War because of American air power that came at Saddam Hussein and just destroyed and annihilated Saddam Hussein's cities and armies and so on. So it says that he came against him like a storm, like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen, and with many ships. That was the greatest naval armada that took place since World War II. And this Gulf War carried more firepower than World War II. And of course, chariots and horsemen, we mobilized and moved a lot of troops throughout the Middle East with tanks and trucks and troops and so on. So it says, with chariots, with horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall enter into the countries, and shall overflow, and passed over. The United States and NATO came into the Middle East, set up military bases all over the Middle East and Saudi Arabia. And it says, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. And they set up in Egypt and other places in the Middle East. So they overflowed and passed over. Now notice verse 41. And he shall enter also into the glorious land. Notice, he didn't attack the glorious land. He entered in. And if you recall, George Bush Sr. went into the glorious land. He was invited in. And the Israelis allowed the United States to set up Patriot missiles. So when Iraqi Scuds would come over Israeli skies, the Patriot missiles would fly off and intercept those Scuds, so none of the Israeli cities would be damaged. So he entered into the glorious land. Then it says, and many countries, is italicized and not in the original. It says, many countries, or many shall be overthrown. And when you look into the Farrar Fenton translation of the Bible, it says, many will fall. And if you recall, Saddam Hussein's 1,000,000-man army fell before and submitted themselves before the U.S. and NATO. But it says, these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom, who is modern-day Edom. Our booklet online, if you want to read it, Turkey in Prophecy, shows that Edom is modern-day Turkey and a NATO partner. Moab, and we have another booklet, Syrian Prophecy, that'll prove to you that Moab is modern-day Syria. And the chief of the children of Ammon. Notice the Bible makes a clear distinction here. It says the chief of the children of Ammon. Ammon is modern-day Jordan. And it says that the government of Jordan sided with the king of the north. And it did. It is actually documented that the government of Jordan sided with the NATO allies, but the people of Jordan were with Saddam Hussein. And the Bible makes this clear distinction, and it's actually documented, and we document that in that booklet, Middle Eastern Prophecy. It says, and he shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries. And if you recall, the United States had no-fly zones and controlled the airspace of many of those countries in the Middle East. And the land of Egypt shall not escape. The U.S. and NATO controlled Egypt at that time during the Gulf War. Verse 43. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver. And it means the economies of these nations. The U.S. also controls many of the economies of these Middle Eastern nations. And over the precious things of Egypt. And the precious things of Egypt is the many ports that Egypt has, especially the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal was vital for the United States to bring in supplies, to bring in fuel to fight Saddam Hussein. And the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps or at his submission. If you recall, the Libyans, and it should read modern-day Sudan, these two nations were against the United States, going against Saddam Hussein. So the United States, through the UN, slapped sanctions on these two countries. So they were at his submission. So the Gulf War was prophesied in your Bible. The king of the north is NATO, and this is describing the Gulf War in great detail. Then we get down to verse 44. Notice it says, but tidings or reports out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. We show you in that booklet that these two Hebrew words, east and north, actually mean Old Persia. And Old Persia consisted of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran. And we receive tidings out of there. Bad tidings. You heard of the glad tidings of the kingdom of God? Well, here we read of tidings out of the east and out of the north, preaching that trouble the king of the north. And what came out of there back in 2000, 2001, Al-Qaeda preaching against jihad, against the West, and it troubled us. The bombing of the USS Cole troubled us. The fateful day in 9/11 troubled us. And it says, therefore he shall go out with great fury. Do we remember the fury when the Twin Towers fell? And that was the first time that NATO invoked the Article 5 of their charter, where it says that if you attack one of us, you attack us all. It says he shall go out with great fury to destroy and to utterly make away, or as it should read, annihilate many. It is actually describing the war on terror and where we are right now. Now, I just skimmed through these prophecies, but we go into great detail in that booklet, Middle East in Prophecy. Then here comes the next great prophetic event that hasn't happened yet. It says, he, that's the king of the north, the president of the United States, shall plant the tabernacles of his palace, that's military occupation, military bases, between the seas and in the glorious holy mountain. The great next prophetic event is when the President of the United States sets military bases in Israel to save Israel, and the context is out of tidings, out of the east and out of the north, and most likely that's going to be Iran. And we look at the trouble that's happening today with Iran, and we're hearing bad tidings coming out of Iran every single day, and it is troubling us. And when we see that, it says he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. The end of NATO, the end of the EU, the end of the United States and Britain as world powers. And after that comes the Great Tribulation. Get this free booklet, Middle East in Prophecy, free of charge, off our website, britishisrael.ca. This is Peter Salemi saying goodbye, friends, and I'll see you here next time on the Watchman program.